Alright, hello everyone. This is a tutorial video to go through the features of CloudSeed 2.0, the new plugin we've released from Ghost Note Audio. It's a heavily upgraded version of the original CloudSeed plugin that I released as open source software about 10 years ago. And we've taken that plugin, we've taken that algorithm, and we've added a whole bunch of new features. We've made sure that it runs on every platform. We've fixed all the bugs that have been reported throughout the years that I never had the time or the opportunity to address. And we formed all of that into this sort of fully polished product. It's available now on Windows and Mac OS. Works on both Apple native silicon and the Intel Macs, and works on Windows 10 and Windows 11. So I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of the different parts of the plugin and show you how they interact and what they do to shape the sound, and give you some tips on how you can come up with your own weird and strange reverb sounds. Now, first things first, if you want to load different presets, you can do that by hitting the preset name here, and you can choose from the list of presets. Right now we're on the init preset, which is just a straight, dry signal. No effect. You can also cycle through them using these arrows. If you want to look at the version of your plugin, or you want to apply your license key, you click the Ghost Note Audio icon here in the top left corner. That opens this dialog, and here you can see we're running version 2.2. and if you have purchased a license, which in case you have, thank you very much, you put in your registered email address here and the license key you received. You hit save, and then you have to restart the plugin once. Once you've done that, the plugin will work without the initial nag screen that loads up when you start the plugin, and the notification here in the top right corner is also removed. Finally, if you want to control the size of the plugin, there are two different options for UI scaling. You enable that by clicking the little arrow here in the corner. So we're in the larger scaling now. We click that, we get a more compact view. Click it again to go back. And the plugin will remember the settings, and they are stored across all instances of the plugin. So if you make this small, you close your DAW, and then when you open it up again, the plugin will remember your preferred size and load that setting. To start off, we have three different reverb sections. We have the multi-tap delay, we have a series of Allpass diffusers, and we have the late reflections, which is a bank of 12 delay lines, which also have optional diffusers in the feedback path. The fourth block we see here is the equalization section, and this is essentially the tone control that controls the damping of the late reflections. So you can independently control the decay of the high and low frequencies. Down here we have the mixer, so we can mix together our dry signal, the early reflections and the late reflections. And next to that, we have a few sort of utility functions. We have the input mix, which lets you sum together the left and right input channels. The plugin is fully stereo throughout and retains your stereo image. If you feel that it feels a bit too wide, you can actually mix the input signals together. At 100%, you essentially get a mono signal coming into the plugin. And at 0%, you retain full separation of the left and right channels. We have a high cut and a low cut on the input itself, and you can enable or disable these using these buttons. Finally, we have two special features. You can enable or disable the interpolation. That takes effect when you're modulating the delay lines. I would recommend having it on by default, as that's probably what you want 9 out of 10 times. But if you do disable the interpolation, you can get a bit of a special effect where it will add quantization noise into the reverb tank, and you get this sort of build up of white noise over time, and it can create a really nice sort of whooshy ambient texture. So it's more of a special effect, but it can be very pleasant in certain situations. So do experiment with this button. I'm not going to go into much detail about how I use it, so I would just recommend you experiment and see if you like it. And if it's not something you enjoy, then just keep it enabled. Finally, we have the cross seed knob here, and this controls how the random patterns are generated for the left and the right channel of the plugin. So down here we have these random seeds, and these are used to generate random patterns of echoes, and they are separate for the left and the right channel, and at 0% you essentially have completely different patterns for the left and the right side of the plugin, and you can crank it up to 100%, and at that point you bring the random patterns together until they meet in the middle and they become identical to one another. So this essentially controls the stereo width of the plugin. So at 100% both channels behave identical, and at 0% you get completely different behavior on the left and the right channel. So you get a really big wide stereo effect going. Sometimes it can be a bit too much, and you might want to try and put it somewhere in the middle. To begin with, as we experiment, I'm just going to set it to 100%, and then we're going to see what effect that has when we bring in more of the random features in the plugin. So let's try playing something, see what it sounds like. It's fully dry at the moment. Let's bring in the early reflections, and let's enable the tap delay. So this is the number of taps. Let's set it to something low so that we can sort of more easily hear what's going on. We'll set the length to the maximum, 1 second. And let's try turning down the decay. At 0%, you essentially get no decay of the samples. So you just get 1 second's worth of random impulses, which sounds something like this. Let's try adding a few more taps. Now you can hear that the very last taps have about the same gain as the first tap. So as I was saying, there's no decay, so you get this sort of square window. It can be very interesting for special effects, and it adds a lot of density to the echoes if you then feed that into the late reflections, which we'll do in a bit. But if you turn off the decay, you start getting a bit more of a natural sound. It decays over time. And if you turn off the count to, I don't know, 200, you already have a very nice, completely random reverb. It's essentially an impulse response that's been generated by a random algorithm. Now, I've mentioned this thing being controlled by randomness and having seeds to control the randomness, and those are the 4 parameters down here. Now, if you choose a different seed, it will generate a completely different random pattern for the impulse response. The more taps you have, the less the effect is noticeable because they sort of even out over time. But when you have a handful of them, the effect becomes pretty apparent. You can hear this one's sort of quite lumpy. This one even more lumpy. That one's quite interesting. And if you turn off the count again, you can hear it's quite bright, and it's also not a very big wide stereo field. So let's first address the brightness and use the low cut to take out some of the high frequencies. That's what happens in nature because air density will block the highest frequencies from reflecting as well as the lower frequencies. So you expect some sort of low cut to happen in a real environment. So that feels a bit more natural. What we can then do is we can reduce the cross seed from 100% to, well, let's just take it all the way down so that we have a completely different random pattern on the left and the right channel. So now it feels a lot wider and bigger. Let's move on to the diffusion block. We can disable the taps and enable the diffusion. Put this back up to 100. The Allpass diffusers are essentially little feedback blocks, and they pass all frequencies through, but they generate a sort of tail of echoes in their wake. And this can sound very metallic if it's just a static, well, let's start with a single diffuser, and you should be able to hear a little bit of a metallic effect. Actually, quite a pronounced metallic effect here. So the question is, how do we tweak it to get rid of that? And this is actually one of the secrets that the engineers behind the Lexicon 224 came up with. They realized that by adding a subtle amount of modulation to the delay line, you can get rid of quite a lot of that metallic echo. The metallic sound is created because you essentially have a bit of a comb filter effect going. You get an amplification of a very certain narrow frequency band. So let's try adding some modulation here. The other thing we can do is we can reduce the delay, we can reduce the feedback a little bit, and we can put multiple of these in series. And that again helps with reducing the effect. Let's try a different sound source here. Now, what we can do is we can continue to increase the number of stages in series. We can go all the way up to 12. This gives us an even smoother echo density, but it comes with a side effect, and that's the fact that we fall victim to what's called the center limit theorem. What the center limit theorem tells us is that any signal, no matter its shape, even if it's rectangular, if you pass that signal and you convolve it with itself multiple times, which is essentially what we're doing when we're putting these all-pass filters in series, is that you always end up with a normal distribution, like a smooth sort of bell curve. What we hear is that we go from a very sharp metallic sound to a thick, lush, big sound. But the echo density essentially builds up slowly and then goes back down. And this has the effect of creating a non-linear reverberation. It can be a really cool effect, but if you're aiming for realism, this will definitely take it out of the realm of reality and into something that can only be achieved in computers. And so if you want a natural sort of slight thickening of the early reflections, try 2 to 4 blocks in series. If you want something a bit more strange and unusual, then try 8 blocks or up to 12 blocks. Right, let's move on to the main event, which is the late reflection block. So on its own, let's go to just one line, one delay line, and on its own, this is what it sounds like. So we just have a straight up delay. Because we have cross seed set to 100%, it's the same delay length on both the left and the right channel. If you take that down a bit, we start getting a difference in the left and the right channel. By adding more lines, we can create a bit more thickness. One thing to remember here is that the delay time of each of these lines is controlled by a random number, which is in turn controlled by the seed we set here. So we can try different numbers. And then we can go back and get more stereo effect. Increase the decay. Now you can hear that we have a fairly decent tail for our reverb, but it's still a very sparse reverb. We can hear individual hits still, even seconds after the initial hit. Now, in a natural environment, what happens is that these echoes, they get diffused and they spread out over time. And that's obviously part of what we're trying to replicate here with the tapped delay line and the all-pass diffusers. But Cloudseed also has another trick up its sleeve, and I believe this is also something that came from the guys at Lexicon. You can put an Allpass diffuser in the feedback path of each of the delay lines, and that has the effect of smoothing out the echoes over time, which sounds and feels very natural. So let's try it again. You can hear that after a second or so, you have a very smooth tail with no discernible clicks or attacks in the signal, compared to if we turn it off. We can still make out the individual attack sections of the piano string being hit. Now, in the late reflection block, we also have some modulation being applied, both to each of the individual delay lines, as well as the delay time of the Allpass diffusers in the feedback path. At the moment, these are set to quite subtle values, and they're only really there to break up what would otherwise become a sort of metallic resonance. But we can use this to our advantage. We can use it to create special effects, sort of like chorusy effects and so on, by just increasing it a little bit. And you can take it to the extremes where you start getting this sort of seasickness effect, which is quite interesting for special effects. Not very pleasant for adding to vocals or something like that. But if you want something that's meant to be eerie and stand out and sort of jarring, then that can be pretty cool. Let's try putting all of these elements together and creating a really thick, really lush reverb by feeding the tap delay line into the Allpass diffusers, into the late reflections, and see where we end up. So I hope that's given you a good idea of how the plugin works and what you can do with it. It's available now on our website at ghostnoteaudio.uk, and we do have a free evaluation mode, so you can download the plugin and run it, try it out. If you do like it, then please do go back and purchase a license. But there's no obligation to buy a license, and you can run the software for as long as you need to in order to evaluate it. Thank you very much.